Hi, welcome back. The security stories are going really well. Thanks everyone for watching. I've got quite a few of them. I've got 23 years worth of security stories to go through. I've had a few comments from people saying, this stuff's not true, the guy's made it up. Look, you know, if you go down south and ask around, you'll probably find out that some people remember me, and everything I say on here is what I found to be, you know, my experience. It's all true. Obviously it's from my perspective. It doesn't mean that stuff happened every single night, but these are incidents that occurred. They 100% happened. There's nothing that I've made up here that's been fictionalized or greatly exaggerated or anything like that. Obviously I'm not giving names and dates out of respect for others, and there's quite a few stories that are even more outrageous that I don't feel comfortable telling, so bear that in mind. So this one is about biker gangs, and I managed to find out quite a lot about these organised motorcycle clubs, you know, the type with patches on that I guess the normal version would be what people would call the Hells Angels, but there's actually loads and loads of clubs that wear patches that follow the same rules and regulations pretty much as the Hells Angels do. They're definitely the most well known of the clubs. There's obviously a lot of biker clubs that are just nice people, you know, they form up, they do nice going out, do some charity events and don't get involved in anything. They don't tend to wear patches or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of more outlaw side of the biker gangs, and I had a lot of dealings with them early on in my security career. So the first and second jobs I ever had in my career, the first was at a little club where I started out when I was 17, and that was kind of a rock club, and obviously that attracted some biker guys, and that's where I first met these guys. The second place was quite bizarre. It was like a working men's club. It was pretty rough, and it was half made up of kind of guys that had just finished the day doing scaffolding, building work and that kind of thing, because they had pretty cheap beer and they were open till like 2 o'clock in the morning, and they were not particularly judgmental about who they let in. You know, you could turn up covered in, you know, clothes from decorating all day or whatever. So, you know, you had a lot of guys going in there that were good guys, you know, working class guys, but it was rough, you know, when they all had a few beers, a lot of testosterone kicking around, and they used to get pretty handy with each other. And it was the kind of place where these guys would have a tear up, you know, we would sort of take them outside, they would have a fight outside, and then the next week they would promise the management, hey, we won't do that again, and they would be let back in. And because it was that kind of venue, these guys in the bike clubs were also attracted to come there for their late night drinks. So the same guys that I kind of knew from the first club I worked at were coming into the second club as well. I'm not going to give the name of the bike club. It was an internationally known name. They've got chapters all over the world as far as I'm aware. I'm not an expert on bike clubs. I'm just telling you what I found out as I began getting to know these guys. So my first dealings with them were when they came in and they had a guy with them called a prospect. Now I'm naturally curious, you know, I'm a guy that's never been around bike clubs. I've never really had any interest in that kind of thing, in the Hells Angels or Harleys or any of that stuff. I like motorbikes. I like pretty much Japanese bikes that are quick, and I'm not really that interested in Harleys, etc. So these guys came in, I started chatting with them because I'm a naturally curious person, and I think they were a little taken aback that a young security guy was kind of chatting to them and being affable and taking an interest in their club and what they were up to. And I asked them, you know, about this guy who was a prospect. And a prospect is someone who wants to join the club, and he's not a full member, but he has to go through basically an initiation to be able to get into the club. And that could be many things. With this particular lot, they told me that he had kind of got a bit beaten up by them as part of their initiation. Nothing serious, you know, they just sort of give him a few digs. They had all urinated on a pair of jeans that he had, that he then had to wear and couldn't wash, which seemed pretty gross to me. Again, being a germaphobe, you know, I would definitely have been saying no to joining that club as soon as I found out there was urine involved. And then after that, this guy was like a dog's body, and that went on for many months. I'm not exactly sure on the time scale, but for months and months he had to do exactly what these guys said. And they were set up in a military type formation. You know, they had like a sergeant and a master of arms, and all these sort of military terms for the various different ranks within their organisation. And they took that very, very seriously, the hierarchy of the guys in that organisation. And they formed themselves as a sort of military organisation would. You know, they tried to do things in a strategic manner, I guess. That was obviously somewhat tempered by the fact they also liked to have a lot of drink. They also did drugs. So, you know, it was kind of organised and not organised in equal measures. So they had this prospect guy, and he would be the sort of dog's body when they came into the club. And one of the things I noted that they would do was, if someone kind of annoyed them, even if they just looked at these guys funny and the guys didn't like the look of the other guy, the civilian that was looking over at them, they would send the prospect over to kind of start trouble. So if you're ever in a bar, a guy with prospect written on the back of his cut off leather walks over to you and starts kind of being a bit of a pain, you know that you're probably in from a kick in for the rest of the bike gang, because that's the game that they're playing. They're going to send the prospect over. He's going to start talking some shit to the guy. The guy at the bar is probably going to get a bit leery, and maybe they're going to throw some hands, and then the whole bike gang is going to pile in. And this is how I got involved. Obviously, I had to then jump into the middle of this fracas and try and sort of drag some people off, try and get people outside the club, because the rest of the club and the management of the club don't want a giant fight going on there and everything getting broken. Not ideal from my perspective. So I used to ask these guys, please, 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 if you're going to do stuff, you know, do it outside, drag the people outside, whatever you got to do. If you're having a fight with someone, then do it outside the establishment, then you can come back in. Otherwise, we can't let you back in. And I had some issue with the way that they did this, because what I said to them, you know, if that prospect goes and starts a fight with someone at the bar, even if that someone at the bar is giving you the eye and he's obviously, you know, spoiling for a fight or whatever, why have you then all got to jump in and beat up that one guy? You know, that seems really unfair, and it's kind of not very manly to all jump in and pile in on one guy. And they said, look, that's one of the club rules. And they then began to tell me they had this whole list of rules and regulations that they ran by, which I kind of found odd, because they are supposedly a maverick bunch that's outside of the rules, and they hate governmental rules and regulations. So they formed a club and then wrote loads and loads of rules and regulations that they really strictly have to follow, or they get in massive trouble. So kind of ironic. So the rules and regulations were, if any one of the guys in the club got in a fight, the whole lot had to pile in on his side. So that would be understandable if one of the guys got in a fight with multiple other guys and he was, you know, getting the shit kicked out of him, and then they all piled in to help him. But if he's gone over and started a scrap with one dude, and then they all pile in and kick the crap out of one dude, that kind of seems a little bit cowardly to me, which is what I told them. You know, I told them exactly this. Again, they were pretty surprised that I had the affront to say stuff like that, but they kind of let me get away with it, I guess. I mean, there was plenty of them. They could have easily have beaten me up as well, and we'll get to that bit in a minute, because that happened a couple of times as well. And they had a guy called the Master of Arms that was the sort of, he was a really big, brutish looking guy. He looked like a giant rugby ball. I mean, he wasn't like rippling muscle, he was quite fat, but he wasn't particularly a very pleasant man. He was quite a brusque guy, let's put it that way, kind of stoic and brusque, and a bit of a grumpy old git. And he was their Master of Arms, and he used to kind of dictate what was going on in terms of if they had to have a fight or whatever. I ended up being pretty good friends with a couple of these guys because I saw them so much, and we just got on. We had some other stuff in common as well. A couple of the guys were into sort of their outdoor stuff, and a couple of even were doing clay pigeon shooting and stuff like that. So we had a bit of stuff in common. Obviously, at the same time, I was well aware that this gang was kind of running some illegal stuff as well. You know, that's how they were making their money. I never saw any of that, but that was certainly the impression I got. They weren't making their money through selling used motorbikes, let's put it that way. So being friendly with them, I even got invited to one of their weddings. I actually got invited over to the clubhouse a few times after the club had thrown out, and they would have like a party back there, and a few girls would come back, etc. And then one night, I remember we got invited from there to a bigger house party, and some guy had a huge detached house out in the countryside. I have no idea how these guys all knew each other, but we ended up at this basically like a big mansion, and pretty nice place. It was full of guys that were, in different biker clubs. We're all getting along with each other. I was probably one of about three people there that were not in biker clubs, and I was obviously just in my normal clothes. Everyone else was in their cut off, etc. And one of the guys came over to me that I'd never met before from a different club altogether. He kind of put his arm around me, gave me a drink, and he's like chatting away. Really cool guy. I think he was Danish. And he said, check this out. And he opens his mouth and he's got a scorpion in his mouth. And I thought, well, this is very strange indeed. I was like, what the hell, dude? And he said, oh, yeah, I really, I'm into all these different insects and spiders, arachnids or whatever. And he said, come with me. So he takes me up to this room, opens the room up. There's this sort of weird green light coming from this room. And it's literally got all these like glass boxes throughout this room. On each wall, there's like, I don't know, 50 boxes maybe. And in there, they've got tarantulas, there's like scorpions, there's all kinds of snakes and stuff. So I'm pretty nervous around snakes. But anyway, he said, do you like these? And I was like, yeah, they're pretty interesting. It wasn't what I was expecting to see at a party. And he's telling me all this stuff about them. He ends up getting me to hold a tarantula because I'd never been anywhere near these things before. So I'm holding it. He explained to me that if you like breathed on them, the carbon dioxide in your breath basically slows them right down. It's kind of like Valium for tarantulas. So if it started to move too fast up my arm, you would just breathe on this thing and it would calm right down. So that was pretty cool. I had this thing on my arm for a while. We went downstairs, I still had it, and the people at the party were like looking at it and stuff. One thought it was pretty cool. Anyway, one of his friends then says to me, hey, he actually put a really dangerous scorpion in his mouth a couple of weeks ago at a party, and it stung him on the roof of his mouth, and it was possible that he may have died. And we all wanted him to go to the hospital, but he said no, he was gonna time it, carry on drinking at the party, and just see what happened. And although he got pretty ill, he didn't actually die. So he was a crazy dude. We all ended up staying over at this party. People crashed out. I woke up like on a sofa in the morning. When I got up to go, this dude came and met me before I left, and he said, hey, I've got a present for you, man. And he brings out this vivarium thing, glass box, and in it is a Chilean rose tarantula, which he gave me. And he said, I want you to take that with you and, take it home and look after it. It's yours now. You've got a new pet. So I couldn't really say no. And I ended up keeping this thing. I think I must have had it about 7 years after that. And I actually ended up passing it on to someone else, a friend of mine, when I moved house, and they really liked it. I didn't realise they lived for like a long time. They lived for many years. So it wasn't something that was just a couple of months and then it's gone kind of thing. And my friend ended up taking that tarantula. But yeah, crazy story. So being friendly with them, I kind of thought that would give me, a free pass, as it were, that I wouldn't get a hiding if anything really kicked off. And if I had to grab a couple of them and pull them outside, I would do it as pleasantly as possible. But I hoped that the friendship would kind of override, the club regulations, if you like. It didn't. So they made that pretty clear afterwards, and they were pretty nice about it afterwards. But one night there was a huge fight in the club. So a bunch of guys were in there, builders, pretty big and brutal guys. And they basically had a big argument with the biker guys. It was over some nonsense, like one of them was looking at the other one's woman or something ridiculous like that. They all ended up kicking off, and these were all big, capable guys that were pretty violent. They were all used to having a good fight. I actually started dragging some of the bikers out. To be fair, the builders were kicking the hell out of the bikers. The builders were winning. They were pretty imposing dudes, and the bikers were getting their asses handed to them, and I was trying to pull a couple of these guys out and up the stairs to get them out the door, and they then turned on me. You know, about 3 or 4 of the bikers started beating me up. I got punched in the head from behind, which at first I thought was someone else completely different, and I then got repeatedly punched. I was like kicked onto the floor, kicked and kicked and kicked on the floor. Eventually managed to get myself up because there was all kinds of fighting going on around me. Got myself up, grabbed hold of one of these guys again, and then dragged him out backwards, and I was able to kind of drag him up quite a slim stairway, so now there's no one behind me, there's just me and him. I get him to the top of the stairs, put him out the door, and then go back down for someone else. I've shut him outside, he's trying to kick the door in. Go back down, I'm trying to do the same thing. Eventually 2 or 3 doormen from one of the other clubs came in, and we slowly managed to kind of keep doing the same, getting some of the bikers out the front. We left the builders in there, and then got as many of the bikers out as we could. It eventually calmed down. We had a few unconscious guys on the floor. Anyway, the bikers left. You know, they were saying they were going to come back another time and give these other guys some hell or whatever. And sure enough, they did come back, and I spoke to them on the door, and I said, look guys, you know, I thought we all kind of got on with each other and we had a level of understanding. I very pleasantly removed a couple of you guys from the situation because you're getting your asses handed to you, and then you guys all laid into me. A couple of you actually started smacking me in the head from behind, which I don't really appreciate. And they were like, yeah, you're putting your hands on us, you know, you're dragging us off, so we're going to, you know, obviously retaliate, and we're going to start hitting you. And I was like, yeah, but we're friends. And they were like, yeah, nothing's changed. You know, we'll buy you a beer, we'll sit and have a beer with you, but you're not a club member. You're putting your hands on people, and we're going to attack you if you do that, basically. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for me. You know, there was no sort of friendly loyalties. The club superseded everything. Now, these guys had a lot of girls that were hanging around them, and they would take these girls back to the clubhouse, etc. The girls were kind of like groupies, I'm guessing I would describe them as, and they were really keen to, you know, be close to the club members, obviously trying to work their way into relationships with some of these guys. And that's kind of where things went a little bit sour for me, because some of these girls were nice girls, you know, decent girls. They were clearly attracted by the excitement and the danger and all that kind of thing, and the lifestyle and whatever. The girls were kind of like rocky girls, you know, leather jacket, Nirvana t-shirt, all that kind of stuff. And they were hanging around these bike dudes trying to kind of find a way in with them. And a couple of them ended up in long-term relationships, and a couple even got married with these guys. And that's where things really took a turn from my perspective. As soon as these girls entered these long-term relationships, it became very obvious that they were abusive relationships, you know, that the guys were knocking these girls around. Now, I don't know if that's common in that sort of community, but one of the issues I had, I spoke to the guys about it because it actually happened in the club one night just outside the door. One of the guys was literally backhanding his missus outside, and I knew her, you know, she was a nice girl, and I kind of stepped in and said, no mate, it's not going to happen outside the club, and if you guys want to do that kind of thing, you're going to take it somewhere else. And then I offered the girl and said, you know, if you want to come inside and he's going to stay outside, that's also... She actually didn't want to, you know, she wanted to stay with this guy. She wasn't interested in any help from anyone else, which is why I told them to take it elsewhere if that's how they were going to behave. But when I spoke to the guys at the club and I said, you know, and none of you bothered about that, it seemed pretty uncouth. You know, if I was in a club and I had guys knocking women around, I wouldn't be very happy with them, and surely you must have some club rules about that. And they said, yeah, actually we do have club rules about that's his missus, you know, we don't get involved. As soon as someone's in a long-term relationship with a woman, what they do is their business, and no one else must get involved. Even, you know, in those circumstances, if it got into domestics, then that's their business. No one has anything to say. And they said, you know, you shouldn't have even said anything. I said, well, I'm not in your club. And they said, yeah, well, you're kind of lucky that guy didn't hit you, because, you know, he would have considered you were poking your nose into his private affairs. and they saw it as a kind of ownership situation, that the woman was kind of club property, and no one else should be having a comment about that. Which at that point I said, enough's enough from my perspective. I don't think we've got much in common. We've got some different morals that are going to make it hard for us to be friendly with one another. It wasn't long after that I actually left that club, and I started working over in a different town, just because I was getting more money. That club was kind of, it was really hard work. There was fights there all the time. It kind of reminded me of the rowdiness that you saw in like the original Roadhouse movies. Really rough crowd, people kind of throwing bottles across the room and stuff, and someone would just sweep it up and no one would really say much about it. This was back in the probably late 90s, so things were a little bit different back then. The police rarely showed up for any of these occurrences. The managers of clubs never wanted the police called, because that would be a black mark down to them. It was just at the beginnings of the police doing this stuff that they call club watch in the UK, which is where the police kind of offer help to all the clubs, because they try and centralise them as a network, a secure network, that each of the clubs can ring each other and they can ring the police and have a quick response, and it's all supposed to be very friendly and helpful. But what actually started happening was the police would utilise this to gather information about the clubs. So after a while, if the club had X amount of phone calls where they said they needed help because a situation was occurring, the police would often use all that as evidence when it came to trying to get the club shut down. So they would present this to the local council to try and get the licence withdrawn, so the club couldn't have a liquor licence anymore, for example. So of course, knowing this, all the clubs would be desperate to never use this system. They would take part in it because, unbelievably, despite the fact it wasn't the law to be part of it, there was immense pressure from the police and local council that you should be part of it. And then once you were, so a lot of the clubs just paid that lip service and took part in it, but didn't actually share any information. So I moved on from there, moved to a kind of trendier venue, which was attracting a different clientele altogether. That had its own problems, but the biker guys certainly weren't keen to go over there. And in fact, after that, working in a different town, I hardly ever saw them. Occasionally I would see them driving by. From what I understand, that group still exists in that area. Whether or not it's all the same guys, I don't know, but they're still around. They kind of reminded me a little bit of the Black Widows out of that Clint Eastwood film. I was always tempted to try and play that saxophone music when they pulled up outside. I don't think they would have appreciated that, but still, you can see where the idea for that bike gang came from, because this whole sort of rules and regulations side was kind of anal, and it kind of took away from the fact that these were supposed to be really hard ass, 1% guys that were doing this maverick stuff all the time, and actually they were more worried about which rules and regulations they should and shouldn't be following than anything else. Interestingly, the prospect that I mentioned at the beginning, he ended up dropping out the club. He was actually quite a decent guy, and he didn't like some of the stuff that was going on that he was being asked to do, and so fair play to him. I think he even got to the point where he could have become a full club member, and at that point I think he was there a couple more months, and then he decided it wasn't for him. More to the point, it was too regulated for him, and he didn't agree with a lot of the club rules and policies, and he was kind of a maverick to the club rules, so that he was getting a lot of grief because he wasn't sticking to what they wanted him to do. So I believe he went off and did his own thing and left the club. I hope that is of some interest. Most people probably haven't been anywhere around these kind of clubs, so they may not know this stuff. Obviously, if you've watched some of the bike films or series or whatever, then you've probably seen some of it on there, but at least this confirms at least some of that is true or false or whatever may have been presented. But this was my experience. That may not be the same for all bike clubs. I'm sure they're all different. They probably follow a similar rule set but not exactly the same. So apologies if you're in a bike club and it's different where you are, and I've no doubt it would be. You know, in some of the other videos, like the truth about strip clubs, we've had people say that's not true, I go to a strip club and it's different. Yeah, I get that. You know, across the world there will be many different types of strip club. I'm talking about ones in the UK, and I'm specifically talking about the ones I worked at. The same with these guys. They would have been running their bike club in one way. If you go to the other side of the world, I'm sure you'll find things done slightly different as well. Leave your opinions in the comments about that. You know, if you've got some interesting info that you found out, or you're in a bike club and you want to share anything down below, love to hear it. Look forward to reading them. Take care, guys. See you next time.